Good day, everybody. I hope that you are well and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 8 English lesson on misplaced and dangling modifiers. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts, grade 8, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of misplaced and dangling modifiers. All right. So we said our chapter is misplaced and dangling modifiers. Our subject is English Language Arts. Grade 8. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of misplaced and dangling modifiers is, are the modifiers used correctly, and to select the misplaced or dangling modifiers. All right. So when it comes to our chapter, which is misplaced and dangling modifiers, right? So we have modifiers and we have dangling modifiers, right? All right. So a modifier, right? It is a word or it is a phrase that modifies or describes another word or a phrase. So once again, we're saying a modifier is a word or phrase that modifies or describes another word or a phrase. and a misplaced modifier, right? So we basically have misplaced modifiers as well as dangling modifiers. So a misplaced modifier is a modifier that appears to modify the wrong word, right? Or it modifies the wrong phrase because it is too far from the word or phrase that it should modify. All right, and if we look at an example, it says Winston saw monkeys and peacocks on vacation in India. So Winston saw monkeys and peacocks on vacation in India, which means that this sentence has a misplaced modifier and it wrongly suggests that monkeys and peacocks were on vacation. So it's not monkeys and peacocks that were on vacation, right? But it was Winston. But the way the sentence is constructed, right, it is in a way that seems as if the monkeys and the peacocks were on vacation in India. And this sentence correctly suggests that Winston was on vacation. Oh, not yet. Not yet that one. So the next one, this is now where we correct the sentence, right? So if we correct the sentence, then we, for example, say on vacation in India. So on vacation in India, Winston saw monkeys and peacocks. So do you see how the sentence has changed now after it was corrected? First, we said Winston saw monkeys and peacocks on vacation in India, and that gives us an indication. This basically has a misplaced modifier because it wrongly suggests that monkeys and peacocks were on vacation, and it even sounds like it, like monkeys and peacocks were on vacation. But if we correct that sentence by saying on vacation in India, comma, Winston saw monkeys and peacocks. Now it gives us a clear indication that Winston was the one that was on vacation, but he then saw monkeys and peacocks, right? So, which means that before we go on to dangling modifiers, a misplaced modifier is a modifier that appears to modify the wrong word or the phrase because it is too far from the word or the phrase that it should modify. So it's basically the wrong word or phrase that it modifies. That is a misplaced modifier. Now we have a dangling modifier. And a dangling modifier, right, is a modifier that appears to modify the wrong word or phrase because the word or phrase that it should modify is missing from the sentence. With a misplaced modifier, the word is too far from the word or phrase that it should modify. But with a dangling modifier, right, the word or phrase that should be modified, right, is basically as either missing from the sentence. Sorry. All right. And if we look at an example, right, it says, trying to fall asleep, the sheets felt uncomfortably hot. So, trying to fall asleep, the sheets felt uncomfortably hot. So, if we look at that sentence, right, it says this sentence, right, it is a dangling modifier. And the reason why it is a dangling modifier, it's because it wrongly suggests that the sheets were trying to fall asleep. Because it says trying to fall asleep, the sheets felt uncomfortably hot. It doesn't even sound as if somebody is trying to fall asleep. It actually does sound as if the sheets are trying to fall asleep and them being extremely or uncomfortably hot. So that is a dangling modifier. But if we were to fix that sentence, right, and we say trying to fall asleep, comma, I felt uncomfortably hot in the sheets. I referred to someone. And it specifically gives the indication that this person was trying to fall asleep. But because the sheets were uncomfortably hot, they couldn't. So, which means that this sentence now correctly suggests that the person who is I was trying to fall asleep. Right? So, once again, before we go on to aplusstudents.ca, we are doing misplaced and dangling modifiers, and we have two different types of modifiers. We have the misplaced modifiers as well as the dangling modifiers. And modifiers, right? It's words or phrases that modifies or describes another word or phrase. And then we have a misplaced modifier. And a misplaced modifier is a modifier that appears to modify the word or phrase because it is too far from the word or the phrase that it should modify. And a dang modifier is a modifier that appears to modify the wrong word or phrase because the word or phrase that it should modify is missing from the sentence. Right? And that is our two types of modifiers. And we can always fix that modifiers, right? So that it can correctly suggest what the sentence or what the writer is trying to say. All right. So now we're going to a+students.ca, where we are going to say whether it is, we're going to say which modifiers there are, or if it's been used correctly, and we're going to either select misplaced modifier or a dangling modifier. All right, so now we're going to the first one, which is, are the modifiers used correctly? And we said that modifiers is a word or phrase that modifies or describes another word or phrase. And a misplaced modifier is a modifier that appears to modify the wrong word or phrase because it is too far from the word or the phrase that it should modify. And we made an example where we said Winston saw monkeys and peacocks on vacation in India. And that sentence gives us an idea, or it sounds as if Winston actually saw that the monkeys and the peacocks were on vacation. Not just that he saw them, it's like as if the peacocks and the monkeys were on vacation, because that is how it sounds. Which means that that sentence has a misplaced modifier. And a misplaced modifier, we said, appears to modify the wrong word or the phrase because it is too far from the word or the phrase that it should modify. And if we were to fix that sentence, right, then we can say that on vacation in India, Winston saw monkeys and peacocks. Now we know that Winston is actually the one that is on holiday in India, on vacation, right? And while being on vacation, he saw monkeys and he saw peacocks. And now we have a dangling modifier. And a dangling modifier is a modifier that appears to modify the wrong word or it appears to modify the wrong phrase because the word or the phrase that it should modify is either missing from the sentence. And if we were to look at an example of a dangling modifier, then we can say, trying to fall asleep, the sheets felt uncomfortably hot. So, trying to fall asleep, the sheets felt uncomfortably hot. So, if we look at that sentence, right, remember we said a dangling modifier, it appears to modify the wrong word or phrase because the word or the phrase that it should modify is either missing from the sentence. So, trying to fall asleep, the sheets felt uncomfortably hot. So, which means that this sentence is a dangling modifier. So, it's a dangling modifier. And it wrongly suggests that the sheets were actually trying to fall asleep. The sheets were being hot and they were trying to fall asleep. But if we correct that sentence, right, and then we can say that trying to fall asleep, I felt uncomfortably hot in the sheets. So now I refers to a person that actually felt hot and uncomfortable and that couldn't sleep. right. So that is basically our dangling modifiers, and we have our misplaced modifiers. Now we're going on to our test. Before we go into a test, it says thriving in wet climate. Thriving in wet climate. Moss that looked like little green beards, hung from the branches of massive Douglas firs. All right. So it says that the first one that we read, it says the first sentence, right? We need to say if it's either a misplaced or dangling modifier. So, thriving in the wet climate, moss hung from the branches of massive Douglas firs that looked like little green birds or beards. All right, so which means that in our first sentence, right, it has a missing or there's a misplaced modifier because the modifier that looks like little green beards is adjacent to massive Douglas firs. And this sentence wrongly suggests that the massive Douglas firs looks like little green beards. And the second sentence is correct because that looks like little green beards, which is adjacent to moss, which is what it should modify. So that the second sentence it says, thriving in wet climate, moss that looked like little green beards hung from the branches of massive Douglas firs. All right. So now we're going to our test. We're going to say which sentence is correct, right? It says, disorientated by the dizzying flurry of snow, Rita's thick wool coat cushioned her inevitable fall. Or we say Rita's thick wool coat served as a cushion when disorientated by the dizzying flurry of snow, she inevitably fell. So we need to choose the correct one. It says disorientated by the dizzying flurry of snow or flurry of snow. Rita's thick wool coat cushioned her inevitable fall. Or Rita's thick wool coat served as a cushion when disorientated by the dizzying flurry of snow, she inevitably fell. So we need to choose the correct word or sentence. All right, and if we were to choose the correct one, let's choose this one. Yes. So the second option is correct. Okay, the next one says which sentence is correct? In 1935, a time capsule called the Crypt of Civilization, not to be opened until year 8113, was buried by Dr. Thornwell Jacobs. Or we say in 1935, a time capsule called Crypt of Civilization was buried by Dr. Thornwell Jacobs, not to be opened until the year 13. All right, and we can then choose option one. Yes. Now we're going on to the next one. It says that which sentence is correct? We need to choose the correct sentence, right? The gardener coated his skin with aloe. After hours of working in the yard, his skin had turned as red as a lobster. Or do we say the gardener coated her skin or his skin with aloe? After hours of working in the yard, he had turned as red as a lobster. So we need to say which sentence is correct. The gardener coated his skin with aloe. After hours of working in the yard, his skin had turned as red as a lobster. Or the gardener coated his skin with aloe. After hours of working in the yard, he had turned as red as a lobster. So I don't know if it's now the skin has turned as red as a lobster or he had turned. Let's say he had turned as red as a lobster. Yes, he had turned as red as a lobster. All right, the next one says, with its pleated ribs that expand and contract, So, with its pleated ribs that expand and contract depending on the availability of water, the saguaro, the saguaro cactus can survive extreme heat and reach a height of 50 feet. Or do we say with its pleated ribs that expands and contracts depending on the availability of water? Extreme heat is no match for this saguaro cactus, which can reach a height of 50 feet. Let's try this one. It's actually the first one. So the first one is actually correct. All right. Now we're going on to the next one, which is we need to select either the misplaced or the dangling modifier. Right? And we say the modifier is a word or phrase that modifies or describes another word or phrase. Then we said we have a misplaced modifier. And a misplaced modifier is a modifier that appears to modify the wrong word or phrase because it is too far from the word or phrase that it should modify. And we have a dangling modifier, right? Which is a modifier that appears to modify the wrong word or phrase because the word or phrase that it should modify is missing from the sentence. All right. So now we need to select the misplaced or dangling modifier. We need to choose one of that. It says Morgan concentrated fiercely on the trajectory of the baseball with squinted eyes. So we need to select the misplaced or dangling modifier. And if we were to choose either the one of the modifiers, we would say with squinted eyes. All right, the next one says grazing at Notre Dame Cathedral. The gray green water of the river Seine rushed by, carrying heart shaped leaves recently fallen from the linden trees. we need to select either the misplaced or dangling modifier. And if we were to select the misplaced or dangling modifier, we can then say that it is gazing at Notre Dame Cathedral. And that is either our misplaced or our dangling modifier. That is a dangling modifier because it appears to modify the gray green water. All right, so now let's go to our test where we are going to select either the misplaced or the dangling modifier. All right, so it says built during the Great Depression. More than 1 million people in the southwestern United States received hydroelectrical power from the Hoover Dam. So we need to select either the misplaced or the dangling modifier. All right. And we chose option one, built during the Great Depression. So here it says the next one says gazing at Notre Dame Cathedral, the grey green water of the river Seine rushed by, carrying heart shaped leaves recently fallen from linden trees. We need to say if it's either misplaced or dangling muddy fire, which is either Notre Dame, gazing at Notre Dame Cathedral, or linden trees. And if we were to choose the correct option, right, the correct modifier, and then we would choose gazing at Notre Dame Cathedral. All right. It says appearing almost like an alien planet. Sandeep could see a huge grid of wind turbines in uniform rows and columns that stretched across the desert and to the horizon. So we need to choose the correct modifier if it's either appearing almost like an alien planet or sand deep. And if we were to choose the correct one, we can say appearing almost like an alien planet. All right. And if we choose we do the last one, we'll say echoing throughout the cave. Julia listened as droplets of moisture fell from the oh, stalactic, stalactites overhead and splashed at her feet. So is it echoing through the cave or splashed at her feet? And if we choose the correct one, let's go to echoing through the cave. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on misplaced and dangling modifiers, right? We said modifiers, they basically, it's a modifier, they modify a word or a phrase that modifies or describe another word or a phrase, right? And we get dangling modifiers and we get misplaced modifiers, right? All right, so that is the end of our lesson. Thank you very much, grade 8, for joining the class, and I really hope that you're going to have a good evening further. Goodbye.